joined in the studio now by the Minister for Health and Local TD, Simon Harris. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Gareth.
You were at a local event there this morning?
I was. I've had a very fun morning. I was up in Marino Special Needs Community School there, just up the road from here, where we were opening their new playground. It's a school, incredible school for children with special needs, 60 years old, and up until today never had a playground. And you had all of the various Lions clubs in North Wicklow, down as far as Arklow, and indeed Dunleary, Killiney, and all the Sir Optimus and my own department contribute money to get this really state-of-the-art fun playground. But I think I had too much fun. The kids were spinning me around on these things up there, so I'm still a bit dizzy from it, but a really great day.
You're almost a year in the job as Minister for Health. It's one of the busiest portfolios in government. How has it been for you?
It's been extremely busy, very intense, very interesting. I've tried to make progress on a number of issues. When I came to the Department of Health, things like moving Holles Street Hospital to St Vincent's and building a state-of-the-art maternity hospital for women was stalled. We've got that going. Reactivating the National Treatment Purchase Fund to drive down waiting lists, making sure every child who receives domiciliary care allowance gets an automatic entitlement to a medical card. So we've got a lot of those things moving. But being very honest, the vicious cycle that we're now seeing of overcrowding in our health service needs me to do at least three things to break it. One is more beds, second is more staff, particularly nurses, and the third is a GP contract, so our GPs can do more services that are currently being carried out in our hospitals. So we've started work on all of them. We're planning on hiring 1,208 more nurses this year. In fact, the HSE are off to London this weekend to try and encourage some of our nurses to come back home. So we've a busy agenda, but I described it previously like eating an elephant, being in health. If you try to eat it all in one go, it becomes very overwhelming. You've got to make incremental progress bite by bite, and that's what I'm trying to do.
And many of your predecessors have found that they get bogged down in the minutiae of it, because it is, you were saying, like 100,000 employees across the health services, and a lot of issues and a lot of legacy issues, and so on. How do you prevent yourself getting bogged down in that same mire that some of your predecessors found they weren't able to take concrete action?
I think you have to do two things. I think obviously as Minister for Health you have to respond to issues as they arise. I mean, this is a service that so many people are dependent on. Things happen, sometimes things go wrong, sometimes things go well, and you have to be able to respond to things. But you've got to, and this is the crucial bit, you've got to set aside time to try and do proactive things, because you could spend all of your time just responding. So I tried to be disciplined and actually say, well, what are the couple of things we're going to get done this month? What are the couple of things we're going to get done between now and the summer? And I found that has worked quite well to date. But the real thing we need to do in health, and I'm really passionate about this, is we need to actually try and get, insofar as possible, cross-party agreement on the direction of the health service for the next 10 years. Because what's been happening to date, you talk about my predecessors, and we've had lots of ministers for health, people have worked really hard in lots of different parties, but ministers for health come and go, and they come up with their ideas, and then the next guy or girl comes in and changes the idea and has a new plan, and the health service is never getting time to actually embed the change. So what we are trying to do in the Oireachtas, and in fairness all parties are working very hard on this, is have a 10-year vision that whoever the Minister for Health is, whoever's in government, here's where we want the health service to get to, here's how we're going to get there. Now, I don't expect agreement on every minute issue in the health service, but even if we can get agreement on structures, what should the health service look like? How should it be divided? Do we have too many layers? I think we do. Do we need to pare back? The HSE, has it grown far too big? Absolutely. Can we devolve some stuff more locally? Yes. Do we get our hospitals working together in hospital groups? Yes. So that Oireachtas committee is due to present its findings to me in the next couple of weeks, probably around the end of April, start of May.
Nonetheless, significant problems remain, as you know, waiting lists. We had a hospital trolley crisis over the winter.
Yeah.
What do you say to listeners, to people, people using the health services, who may not believe that stuff has been done, that you're taking action, that you're changing the culture in there?
I think it's a fair point. I mean, I think what's happened though is that the health service, like a lot of our public services, has suffered from a lost decade. Nobody needs a lecture on what's happened in this country over the last 10 years, but it's been really tough. And as a result, the ability to invest in our public services simply hasn't been there. We are now back, though, in an era of reinvestment. We have the largest ever health budget this year. Money alone won't solve it. But, a lot of my predecessors, instead of actually trying to be able to proactively do things, had to make cuts in really, really hard areas. I don't face that vista. I can now begin to reinvest in health. It is going to take time though, and I've been very honest with people about what are the building blocks, and it is beds, it is the GP contract, it is more staff, it's getting the message out to Irish nurses, Irish doctors, we want you to stay in the country. It's trying to make it more attractive for people to work in the health service, and we have a number of proposals in place in relation to nursing in that regard. I'm conscious the INMO are due to announce the result of their ballot this afternoon, and hopefully if I don't know what the decision will be, politically, but I hope they'll accept the proposals and we can get on with implementing them. So what I do say to people is, I won't be found wanting in terms of trying to make improvements, but we've got to be honest with ourselves as a country. We have risen to great challenges in the past as a country where we've put our mind to it. We need to decide that the health service is a priority issue, not just now, not just for me as Minister, but for the next 10 years, and we're going to make incremental progress each and every year. And on things like scoliosis, things that just absolutely appall us all when we see children waiting in pain. We have shown now that we can get that waiting list down to making sure no child waits longer than 4 months by the end of the year. That would be in line with the NHS in Britain. So we are taking concrete actions, but there's an awful big programme of work ahead of us.
A headline there, on the front of the papers today about health insurance, cuts to tax relief. What's your position on that?
My position on that is that that's not the right way to go about it. I want to create a universal healthcare system where everybody gets access to health on the basis of need, not the ability to pay. But you get there by improving the public health service. You get there by investing in the public health service. You don't get there by penalising really hard-working people, and indeed older people, who are put to the pin of their collar often to actually try to pay for health insurance because they're worried. They're genuinely worried if they don't have it, how will they access services? So if you want a universal healthcare system, you convince people of the public health service over the period of time, and therefore people become less dependent on health insurance. What you don't do is start axing tax reliefs and making it even harder on hard-pressed families. So I don't support that.
How do we move away, though, from a two-tier health system without enormous cost and enormous pain within the system? How do you do that?
I'm not sure it's all cost, because if you actually look at it, certainly there's a need for investment, particularly on the capital side. Our buildings, our hospital buildings, when you walk around them, they're antiquated in many cases. We don't have 21st century infrastructure, so there's costs there on the capital side. We have a paper-based system in many hospitals. We need to move to IT, so there's definitely capital costs. But we spend a lot on health in this country. The health budget for this year is 14.6 billion. It's not all about funding. What it is about is how is the money being spent. And my view on this is quite clear. The HSE has become far too large a bureaucracy. The idea of having a national body to set standards in cancer and, set standards on maternity services is a really good idea. You can't do those things locally. But now the idea that it's just this massive organisation with layers and layers of management, layers and layers of bureaucracy, I don't think that was ever the way it was intended by the people who set it up. We need to pare that back. We need to devolve some of the decision making on day-to-day issues to local areas, to regional areas, so that we can actually be sure that funding is getting to where it needs to get, and we can empower people to make sure, and empower doctors to make sure that funding is spent in patients' interests. So I do believe we can get to universal healthcare. They did it in the UK. Why can't we do it here? But it would be disingenuous of anybody to suggest you can kind of wave a magic wand and get there overnight. It is a journey that we've got to travel.
I'm going to come to a couple of local issues in a moment. Just before we do that, can I ask you a couple of questions and national issues
sure.
again, or can be that the cystic fibrosis drug, where is the HSC on agreement on that?
Well, there's talks going on probably as we speak. There's certainly talks due to take place today. There were talks that took place yesterday in relation to this. If we go ahead and purchase this drug, it will probably be the most expensive drug we have ever purchased in the history of the state. But there's lots of families out there with people with cystic fibrosis and lots of cystic fibrosis patients who really want this drug, and I understand that. They've waited an awful long time. As Minister and as the HSE, I suppose, we have to make sure that we don't allow a drug company extort the taxpayer. We have to make sure that we get a deal that works not just for the taxpayer but for patients. That means we won't be back at the negotiating table in a year or two if a new version of the drug comes out and have to start the whole process again. So I am hopeful of a deal, but I don't want to say anything that will in any way undermine the people negotiating on behalf of the state today. I do want to bring this process to a conclusion. I said I wanted the process concluded within weeks. That remains my position. I want this process concluded ASAP, but I've got to get the right deal, and that requires the drug company and the HSE working together as they are today.
This drop in vaccine uptake, I'm thinking specifically of the HPV vaccine.
Yeah.
Are you concerned about that?
Extraordinarily.
A lot of chatter on social media, a lot of campaigns against the drug, and there has been a corresponding drop in uptake. What are you going to do about that?
I'm extraordinarily concerned. We actually have in this country a cure for a certain type of cancer. We actually have a vaccine that if we vaccinate our young girls in school, we can prevent them getting cervical cancer. Every year, women in this country, over 100 women in this country die of cervical cancer, and that is entirely preventable with this vaccine. We need to see people vaccinated. And what has happened is, and it's really quite disgusting actually, there's been scaremongering and false information about a vaccine that has been approved by the World Health Organization, it's been approved by the European Medicines Agency, has been so rigorously tested. I'm not a clinician, but it has been so rigorously tested by clinicians. And actually I spoke at a cancer conference yesterday, and I thanked clinicians and I thanked the Irish Cancer Society for doing what they're now doing, which is going out and actually debunking the myths, actually saying to people, well, I'm a doctor and this vaccine is safe and this is why you've got to do it, because if you don't do it, women can get cancer. So we need the clinical community, and I know they're well up for this, to be even more robust. And you're right, the space in which we have public debates is changing. A lot more happens on social media now, and we need the clinical voice out there as well. So my message to any person in Wicklow listening to this, if you have an option of vaccinating your child, please do. This vaccine can literally save their life.
Should we be giving it to boys as well as girls?
My gut is yes. It's to go through a health technology assessment, so we have a process that has to go through for that. That will take place this year, and if that stacks up, I would like to see universality, because I think universality does help increase uptake as well.
Can I ask you just about some local issues, Minister? Concerns about Sunbeam House Services in Wicklow. What's your position on that?
Well, Sunbeam House Service has provided incredible services for many years in Wicklow, but I think in recent months and indeed years we've seen a number of parents express very serious concerns, and I believe those parents. I've met those parents. I know many of those parents. Some of the concerns are extraordinarily serious. I want to work with the parents to make sure that they get answers, and I want to work with the parents to make sure that their children get the service they deserve. The HSE recently appointed Gordon Jays. Gordon Jays is from Scotland, used to head up the Child and Family Agency here, to carry out an external review in relation to a number of matters in Sunbeam. That report has now concluded. It's with the HSE. The families have seen it, and I expect that the HSE will now ensure that action is taken. I want to see every single recommendation in that report acted upon with great urgency, and I intend to meet the HSE on this in the next week, and I also intend to meet families impacted next week as well.
It's an issue that's been covered here on the show.
Yeah,
the HSE report was published online 3 weeks ago and was taken down. Why was that?
I think it was unfortunate. My understanding is there's a process that's meant to be followed before you publish the report. They were meant to maybe have redacted some confidential information. I'm not 100% certain, but some confidential information in relation to people's names and identities, which would be normal in relation to reports. The good news is that the family's got it. The good news is I have it, and we've all read it. And I think the families, myself, the HSE, and indeed the Board of Sunbeam are in no doubt as to what the recommendations are. And some of the recommendations are very serious and need to be followed. I need to be very careful what I say in the position that I'm in, so that I don't prejudice any process that needs to take place. But I expect the HSE to get on with making sure that all the recommendations are implemented, and I'll be meeting the families next week to discuss that.
Another issue of local concern is mental health, of course, and suicide prevention. What steps are being taken here locally around these issues?
Yeah, I mean, look, we have seen suicide really blight the community here in Wicklow, but also the country over the last number of years. My colleague, Minister Helen McEntee, has put in place a youth mental health task force, which is, instead of young people being told by the HSE or told by government, here's what you need to do, it's about empowering the voice of young people, working with companies like Facebook and Twitter. And she's been having some really interesting meetings, and that task force is due to present a kind of action plan of actions for young people on mental health in the next couple of months. But I launched only last week, actually, the Wicklow plan for suicide prevention. This is the first local plan, and so we have national policies in relation to suicide prevention, but it's so important that we have action on the ground. So I had the pleasure of launching our Connecting for Life strategy for East Wicklow and Dublin South and Dún Laoghaire. And what this is basically about is saying, yes, the health service definitely has a role to play, of course it does, but so does everybody, so do guards, so do teachers, so do young people themselves, so do all of us as citizens. And it puts together a structure that will bring together all of those people to talk about, in our own county, in our own area, how are things going, what needs to be done, how can we make our population more resilient. And like I say, we are the first area to have this roadmap, so I'm looking forward now to it being implemented. We have seen suicide rates decrease in this area, which is encouraging, but we have so much to do, and every death lost to suicide is obviously one too many. And
what about GP services in Wicklow and primary care centres?
We're one of the last counties in Ireland, part of the county, North Wicklow, South Wicklow does have a service. We're one of the last parts of the country, North Wicklow, not to actually have an out-of-hours GP service. Our GPs in this part of the county are well up for it. It would massively assist with things like hospital admissions if people were able to, out-of-hours, access the GP service. HSE have now gone for tender in this area. The service will be based in Loughlinstown Hospital, and it will basically mean people in Greystones, Bray, and even a little further south than Greystones will be able to access out-of-hours services just like people in other parts of the county are, and I expect the HSE to finalise that in the coming weeks.
And Arklow looking for a primary care centre, where are we at on that issue?
We had really good news in relation to Arklow's primary care centre. They've picked a location. It's going to be located at what was the former Boland's DIY site on the main street of Arklow. A letter of intent has now been been issued to the preferred bidder, and I expect the HSE will enter into a lease agreement by the end of this month. Construction will then get underway, and it's expected that the primary care centre will open towards the end of 2018, start of 2019. So this is a really big development. It's also, I think, been very well received in Wicklow that it's actually going to be on the main street, which should help revive the main street as well and bring more traffic onto it.
Just can I bring it back just to the national picture for a moment? This business this week about water charges, is the current government stable? Are we looking at an election this year?
Well, one thing I know is that I don't think there's people in this country who want a general election. I certainly don't think there's people in this country who want a general election on the issue of water. What I hear from most of my constituents is, will you ever stop talking about water and just sort it out? I mean, we have been talking about water in this country now and what to do about water for many years, at least 5, but probably even an awful lot longer than that at various occasions. We need to sort this. My party is well willing to compromise on this. We did not cover ourselves in glory in terms of how we went about setting up Irish Water. I'm willing to concede that point. I still believe, and my party believes, that if you're going to waste water, which is very different to being charged for water, if you're choosing to waste water, I don't see why you and I should have to pay for that person who's purposely wasting water out of general taxation. I would ask that every party, and I don't want to play party politics with this, but every party just needs to step back from the brink, show a little bit of cop on here and try and sort this out. It can't be beyond the political system to put in place a system whereby most of water will be paid from general taxation. If you waste it or abuse it, you pay a bill. You don't bring people to court or anything else, but you actually send them a bill if you waste water intentionally, and that will ensure that we comply with European directives. What we cannot do, have any minister in this country passing any piece of legislation in the Dáil that they know would be in contravention with the law. And in fairness, I heard Barry Cowan, the Fianna Fáil spokesperson, acknowledge that yesterday on another radio station. We can't actually do that. We don't want to have a situation where we finally put a process in place to find out then that this country starts being fined for being a breach of environmental law. So we need to get this sorted, and I believe it can. I'm pleased that people did seem to slightly step back from the brink yesterday. Legal advice is being sought, so let's try and get this right once and for all.
And finally, the leadership question in your own party seems to have disappeared off the agenda. What happened there?
I don't think it has disappeared off any agenda. I just think the agenda has been very busy. I mean, the Taoiseach made it very clear that he doesn't intend to lead the Fine Gael party into the next general election. You're right, the timing of the next general election is not entirely in the gift of Fine Gael, and is not a certainty when that election will be. So Enda, when he addressed the parliamentary party, did point out that there were 2 very pressing issues on his agenda and on the country's agenda. One, Northern Ireland and trying to get the institutions up and running there. And you know there's a process going on there where there's a new deadline of around Easter to try and have the institutions set up, and the Irish government as co-guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement has a role to play. And secondly, Brexit negotiations are ongoing. Now, obviously, Brexit negotiations are going to go on for a very long period of time, but this period up to the 29th of April is the period in which the guidelines are decided, and it's really important that Ireland's interest is represented in those guidelines. Respect for the border, respect for the Good Friday Agreement, respect for the specific issues that we have in this country, respect for the common travel area, and we need to make sure that the Taoiseach, who is best placed, gets that done. So the Taoiseach, I expect, after that process will update the party. There is no great rush in the Fine Gael party in relation to this matter. There's a busy agenda ahead, and I expect the Taoiseach will make his intentions known shortly.
And your own political ambitions? Would Simon Harris like to be Taoiseach one day?
I have an awful lot on my plate at the moment. It's a great honour being a TD for Wicklow and the Minister for Health. I've already ruled myself out on this occasion when that arises, and who knows what will happen into the future. My fate is somewhat in the hands of the people of Wicklow.
Okay, thanks for joining us, Minister. Minister Simon Harris joining us here on The Morning Show. We're back in a moment.